The air in the Grand Lyceum of Xylos was perfectly synthesized. A gentle, ozonic hum maintained a temperature, pressure, and chemical composition calibrated for optimal Cathar cognitive function. 3 suns, filtered through crystalline panes, cast long, sterile shadows across the tiered amphitheater where the ascendant class sat, their multifaceted eyes fixed on the creature standing on the central dais. The creature was a human, an oddity. A guest lecturer in a university that had existed for 10,000 of his Earth years. His name was Professor Aris Thorne. He was old even by his species' standards. His face was a roadmap of dry riverbeds, his hair a white crown. But his eyes were chips of ancient ice, holding a light the Cathar, for all their genetic superiority and logical purity, could not quite decipher. They saw him as a representative of a death world species, a biological curiosity, surprisingly resilient, unexpectedly clever, but ultimately primitive. A species whose defining trait was weakness, a chaotic and inefficient biology that relied on messy emotions and brutal, short-sighted competition. They were here to learn about human diplomacy and integration, a mandatory course since humanity's startlingly rapid entry into the galactic consortium. The topic of today's lecture, however, was a special request from the student body itself, approved by the Lyceum curators. They had combed through the rudimentary pre-FTL archives humanity had provided. They had found endless references to a concept they understood only in the abstract. They were curious, in a detached, academic way. So they asked him, and he agreed. The title of his lecture shimmered on the data slate behind him. A foundational analysis of intraspecies conflict, Earth's first global war. Aris Thorne let the silence stretch. He looked at their faces. The Cathar were beautiful in a way, tall, slender beings with exoskeletons of pearlescent chitin, their 4 arms resting gracefully on their desks. Their thoughts were not broadcast, but their emotional state was visible in the faint, chromatic ripples that pulsed across their carapaces. Right now they were shimmering with polite, intellectual curiosity, a placid sea of light blue and soft silver. "Before we begin," Aris said, his voice raspy, a stark contrast to the melodic, resonant frequencies of Cathar speech. "I must ask you to reevaluate your definition of a single word. The word is war." He saw a flicker of pale orange, amusement, ripple through the crowd. One student in the front row, whose designation was XY7, activated his vocalizer. "Professor, with respect, the consortium archives are quite clear. War is a state of armed conflict between different communities or species, typically over resource scarcity or territorial disputes. We have studied the minor territorial skirmishes of the G-Gnarl, the ritualized honor duels of the Vex. Our own history contains 2 such resource conflicts in our pre-unification era. They lasted a total of 3 solar cycles and resulted in 412 casualties. A tragic, but statistically insignificant, event in our planetary development. Aris gave a slow, tired nod. "Thank you, XY7. That is indeed a definition. It is also a fatal assumption. What you have described are disagreements with sharp implements. You speak of conflict as a mathematical equation to be solved, a problem of logistics. You assume the goal is to win a resource, to acquire territory, to prove a point." He leaned forward on the lectern, his knuckles white. The light in his eyes seemed to darken. "The first lesson you must learn about humanity is this. Our first war, the one that defined us, the one that forged the very soul of our species in a fire you cannot imagine, it wasn't about resources. It wasn't about territory. We had plenty of both. It was about an idea. And you have no concept, none at all, of what a human will do, what they will become, to prove that their idea is the only one that deserves to exist." The placid blue ripples in the room began to waver, tainted with hints of violet, confusion. "You see," Eris continued, his voice dropping, drawing them in. "You are a unified species. You evolved as a collective. Your consciousness, while individual, is networked. You share a fundamental biological imperative. You look at another Cathar and you see yourself. A variation, perhaps, but the core code is the same. When humanity looked at itself on the cusp of its first global conflict, we did not see ourselves, we saw the other, and we taught ourselves to hate it." He straightened up. "Our world was not one planet. It was 100,000 tribes screaming in the dark, convinced their scream was the only one that mattered. We drew lines in the dirt and called them borders. We invented gods and flags and economic theories, and these were not simply preferences. They were truths. Absolute, unquestionable truths. And the existence of someone with a different flag, a different god, a different idea, that wasn't a disagreement. It was an insult. A threat to the very fabric of our reality. Our first war, what we called the Great War, was not nation against nation. It was a war of one reality against another. The Meridian hegemony believed in the manifest destiny of a single, unified human state, guided by a council of philosopher kings. A world of perfect order, genetic purity, and centralized control. They saw individual freedom as the source of all chaos, the cancer of progress. Opposing them were the freeholds of Saul, a loose coalition of democratic states who believed that the individual was sovereign, that freedom, however messy, was the only thing worth dying for. They saw the hegemony's order as the soulless perfection of a cage. Do you see? This wasn't about a planet's worth of grain or a mountain of ore. This was a war for the definition of the word human. Both sides believed they were fighting for the very soul of our species. Both sides believed they were the heroes. And when both sides believe they are the righteous, the saviors, the good, the capacity for evil becomes limitless. Because everything can be justified in the name of the greater good. A student near the back, a young female with a shimmering emerald carapace, pulsed a question. "Professor, surely logical debate could resolve such ideological differences. A presentation of data, a projection of outcomes." Eris's laugh was a dry, rattling sound. It was devoid of humor. "Logic, data, you are trying to apply a scalpel to a supernova. We had logic, we had data." The hegemony published 10,000-page treatises on the statistical efficiency of their system. The freeholds broadcast trillions of hours of personal testimonies about the joys of liberty. It changed nothing, because this was no longer in the realm of the mind. It was in the blood. It was a fever. Propaganda became our new art form. The hegemony depicted the freeholds as decadent, chaotic animals, their freedom a sickness that would lead humanity to extinction. The freeholds painted the hegemony as mindless automatons, there order the peace of the graveyard. We didn't just recruit soldiers, we recruited souls. We used art, music, stories. We created entire mythologies in the span of a few years. We taught our children songs of hate. We taught them that the face on the other side of the border was not the face of a brother, but the face of a monster. And we were very, very good at it. The violet of confusion was now darkening across the room, shifting towards a muddy, uncertain maroon. They were beginning to understand that this was not a lecture on history. It was an autopsy. "This brings me to my second point," Eris said, his voice hardening. "The nature of the conflict itself. What you call war involves designated combatants in designated zones. Our first war, it had no zones, no boundaries. It was the birth of a concept we called total war, a term that should chill the marrow of any sentient being. Total war does not mean soldier versus soldier. It means factory versus factory, farmer versus farmer, doctor versus doctor, poet versus poet. Every single facet of a society is repurposed for a single function, the complete and utter annihilation of the enemy's ability to exist. Not just their ability to fight, their ability to be. He paused, letting the words sink in. Soldiers on the front line were only the tip of the spear. The true battle was waged by the entire population. Every citizen became a combatant. The scientist who would have cured a disease was now designing a more efficient explosive. The artist who would have created a masterpiece was now drawing posters that depicted the enemy as subhuman insects. The mother who would have raised a child was now working 18-hour shifts in a munitions factory, her hands raw, her mind numb, all to send one more shell, one more bullet, one more instrument of death to a man she'd never met, to kill another man he'd never met. He gestured to a flickering image on the data slate. It was an archival photo, grainy and monochrome, a city, or what was left of it. Skeletal buildings clawed at a sky thick with smoke. This was the city of Argentes, the jewel of the freeholds. It was a city of glass and light, famous for its universities and art galleries. The hegemony did not try to conquer it. They knew the city's spirit was too strong, so they decided to erase it, to make it a lesson. They surrounded it. They cut off all food, all water, all medical supplies. A siege, but not a medieval siege of waiting. This was a modern, industrial siege. For 800 days, they bombarded it, but not just with explosives. That's inefficient. No, they developed weapons specifically for this. They fired shells filled with corrosive agents that didn't destroy buildings, but ate away at the foundations, causing them to collapse slowly, unpredictably over weeks. They seeded the clouds with chemicals that turned the rain to a weak acid, slowly poisoning the ground itself. But the true weapon was psychological. They broadcast into the city 24 hours a day, not threats, but the sounds of life from the outside, the laughter of children, the sizzle of cooking food, the music of a world at peace. They coupled this with pinpoint propaganda targeting specific districts, telling the starving people in one sector that the sector next to them was hoarding food. They turned neighbor against neighbor. They broke the city not from the outside in, but from the inside out. They made the citizens of Argentes destroy their own spirit. He looked directly at XY7 in the front row. The student's carapace was a deep, churning purple of distress. In your skirmishes, a soldier dies. It is clean. In Argentes, a mother had to choose which of her 2 children would get the last piece of bread. A doctor with 1 dose of antibiotic had to choose which of 100 dying children was most valuable to the war effort. This is total war. It is not about killing soldiers. It is about forcing your enemy to kill their own soul before you kill their body. As Eris Thorne finished the sentence, there was a soft clatter from the 3rd tier. A young Cathar student had slumped forward, its 4 arms sliding from its desk and hitting the floor. Its carapace had gone a stark, flat gray, the Cathar equivalent of a dead faint, a complete neurological shutdown in the face of incomprehensible data. Medical drones, silent and efficient, floated down the aisle to attend to the student. The other students barely noticed. Their multifaceted eyes were locked on Thorne, their carapaces now a dark, turbulent storm of indigo and dread. Thorne didn't even glance at the commotion. He seemed to have expected it. The ingenuity that makes humanity a marvel of adaptation, he said, his voice now a low, grim whisper, is a double-edged sword. We are the ultimate problem solvers, and in the Great War, the problem to be solved was the continued existence of other humans. We applied the full, terrifying force of our intellect to this problem, and the solutions we devised, they are the reason we have so many ghosts. The freeholds, pushed to the brink, responded in kind. Their strength was decentralized innovation. Small labs hidden in mountain bunkers and abandoned subways were given a single directive: create what is unthinkable. And they did. They went beyond mere explosives. They understood that the hegemony's strength was its rigid, perfect order, so they decided to attack the concept of order itself. They didn't create a bomb to kill a general. They created a weapon to make his army ungovernable. They engineered micro-drones, the size of dust motes that didn't explode, but emitted a subsonic frequency that induced extreme paranoia and auditory hallucinations. An entire legion of the hegemony's finest soldiers, disciplined and fearless, tore itself apart in a single night, convinced their comrades were enemy spies, hearing whispered betrayals in the wind. But the hegemony's greatest minds were also at work. They analyzed the freehold's greatest asset, their belief in the individual, their capacity for heroism and hope, and they created a weapon to kill hope. He paused, and his own hand trembled slightly as he took a sip of water. They called it the Echo strain. It was a biological agent, an airborne virus delivered via high-altitude missiles. It was not particularly lethal. Its mortality rate was less than 5%. Its purpose was far more insidious. The Echo strain didn't attack the body, it attacked the mind. Specifically, it targeted the hippocampus and amygdala. It erased memory, not all of it, just the emotional context, the connections. A soldier infected with the Echo strain could remember how to fire his rifle, but not why. He could look at a photograph of his wife and children, recognize their faces, but feel nothing. No love, no connection, just the blank recognition of a stranger. Imagine, Aris whispered, the word hanging in the perfectly still air. An army of men who are no longer men, they are shells. They follow orders because it is what they remember doing, but they have no motivation. No anger, no fear, no love for their country, no hatred for their enemy. They fight with the rote, mechanical efficiency of a machine, and when they die, they feel no regret. And when they kill, they feel no remorse. The freeholds sent their heroes, men burning with righteous fury and love for their families, against this tide of blank-faced emptiness. And it broke them. How can you fight an enemy that is already dead inside? How can you find the will to go on when you see the very thing you are fighting for, love, memory, identity, being erased from existence? An image appeared on the slate behind him. It was a field recording. A soldier in the uniform of the freehold sat on the ground, weeping, his rifle on the dirt beside him. Opposite him, a hegemony soldier stood, his face utterly vacant, rifle held loosely, staring at nothing. The freehold soldier was screaming, "Why are we doing this? Why?" And the hegemony soldier just stood there. Blank, empty, an echo. From the fifth tier there was another clatter, louder this time. A second student had fainted, its chair tipping over with the force of its collapse. The medical drones were already on their way. The chromatic ripples in the room had all but vanished. The carapaces of the remaining students were a uniform, deep, bruised purple, the color of deep trauma. One student, a prodigy in xenolinguistics named Jor-L9, was visibly trembling. One of its 4 hands pressed against its vocalizer as if to stifle a sound. Aris took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked older now, as if the telling of the story was draining the very life from him. For 50 years it continued. 50 years of a grinding global meat grinder. 2 billion dead, a quarter of our species. Entire continents rendered uninhabitable. We had poisoned the sky, the water, the very dirt beneath our feet. We had invented 1,000 new ways to kill, and in doing so, we had forgotten how to live. The war didn't end with a climactic battle. There was no final, heroic charge. It ended with a whimper. It ended with sheer, soul-crushing exhaustion. There was almost no one left to fight, and nothing left to fight for. The great, glorious ideas of the hegemony and the freeholds were just ashes in the mouths of starving, broken people. "And it is here," Aris said, his voice softening for the first time, "in the absolute nadir of our existence, that the most human thing of all happened. A paradox. In the heart of the greatest darkness, we created the most brilliant light. The very horror that we had unleashed became the catalyst for our salvation. It began in the trenches of the last front, the Rhine expanse. A stagnant hellscape of mud, wire, and chemical fog, a place where life was measured in minutes. A hegemony conscript, designation 734, was ordered to lead a charge into the Freehold's lines. He was no one special, a farmer before the war. He had seen his friends die. He had killed. He was numb. But on that morning, as the whistle blew, something in him broke, or perhaps something was finally healed. He stood up. He looked at the enemy trench 100 meters away. He saw the faces of other tired, broken men, and he realized the idea he was supposed to kill for was a lie. The idea they were supposed to kill for was a lie. The only truth left in the world was the mud and the pain. He dropped his rifle. He unbuckled his helmet and let it fall, and he began to walk, not forward into the attack, not backward in retreat. He turned sideways and began to walk parallel to the trenches, right down the middle of what was called no man's land. He wasn't surrendering. He wasn't deserting. He was rejecting. He was rejecting the entire premise. His choice was not kill or be killed. His choice was no more. The snipers on both sides had him in their sights. 1,000 guns were trained on him, but no one fired. A Freehold's broadcast drone on a routine patrol happened to capture the image. This lone, unarmed man walking calmly through the heart of hell. The feed was meant to be for intelligence, but a technician in a bunker 1,000 miles away, a young woman whose brother had died on that very front, saw it. And in an act of profound rebellion, she bypassed her superiors and broadcast that image. Unedited, unfiltered, to the entire Freehold's network. The hegemony tried to jam it, but it was too late. The image was mirrored, shared, spread like a virus of peace. For the first time in 50 years, the people on both sides saw not a hegemony automaton or a Freehold's degenerate. They saw a man, just a man, tired, broken, and brave, braver than any soldier charging into battle. He was brave enough to stop. His walk lasted for 4 minutes. Then a stray artillery shell, fired miles away by a computer that didn't know he existed, landed near him, and he was gone. But it didn't matter. In those 4 minutes, he had done more to end the war than all the generals and politicians in 50 years. He reminded us what we were. He reminded us that the lines we drew in the dirt were imaginary. He reminded us that the hate we had been taught was a poison we had willingly drunk. Strikes began at the munitions factories. Mothers blockaded the recruitment centers. Soldiers on both sides began to lay down their arms, not in surrender to the enemy, but in solidarity with each other. The war machine, so vast and unstoppable, ground to a halt because the individual cogs, the human beings, simply refused to turn any longer. In the front row, Jor-El 9, the xenolinguistics prodigy, lowered its hand from its vocalizer. Its brilliant emerald carapace was now streaked with a soft, luminous white. It was the Cathar expression of profound, paradigm-shifting epiphany. It looked at Thorn, and its vocalizer emitted a single, soft-spoken word in its own native tongue. A word for which there was no direct translation, but the closest approximation was, "I understand." Then, with a quiet deliberation that was the opposite of fainting, it powered down its data slate, folded its 4 arms, and closed its multifaceted eyes. It was not sleeping. It was meditating, contemplating. It had not just learned a fact, it had undergone a conversion. It had seen the absolute depths of violence and the transcendent power of its rejection, and in that moment had embraced a philosophy of absolute pacifism. Eris Thorne looked out at the silent, stunned class. 2 students unconscious, one in a state of profound philosophical rebirth. The rest were shattered. Their neat, logical universe had a hole blown through its center. He concluded, his voice tired but clear. "You asked me to explain our first war. You cannot understand humanity by studying our triumphs. You cannot understand our diplomacy, our art, our desperate, clawing resilience by looking at what we build. You must, I am afraid, look at what we are capable of destroying. And the thing we are most practiced at destroying is ourselves. Do not mistake our history for a threat. It is a promise. It is the promise that we as a species have stared into the abyss. We have seen the monster, and the monster was us. And because we know it so intimately, we spend every single day of our existence fighting to keep it chained. Your peace is an inheritance. Our peace is a victory, won every single day against the darkest parts of our own hearts. That is the spark within us. Not the fire that consumes, but the ember that remains after the inferno, the one that whispers, "Never again." Now you understand what it means to be human, class dismissed.